Sony FX5 versus Nikon ZR. Both of these are compact cinema cameras capable of recording raw video internally, and that makes this an incredibly interesting matchup because the price is wildly different between these cameras. The Sony costs literally over double the price of the Nikon, but the Nikon records higher resolution video and beats the Sony in several ways, but there is a deciding factor that may actually make it where the cheaper camera costs more in the long run, so keep watching. Also, if you want a deeper dive on either of these cameras, I have in-depth reviews for both of them that I will link to down in the video description. And side note, this video is sponsored by CrowdReel. Let's now start by talking about the big enchilada, the feature that sets both of these cameras apart from much of their competition, and that is the internal raw video recording. After years of lawsuits and legal battles where Red, the camera company, was suing different companies for using internal raw, including Nikon, Nikon said, hey, how about we just acquire you? So they did that. And then Nikon was not only clear to implement raw video into all their cameras, but they also really opened the floodgates for all other camera companies to add raw video recording as well to their cameras without fear of lawsuits. But how the Sony FX5 implements internal raw recording is very different from how Nikon handles it, because with Nikon, you get a veritable buffet of options, while Sony is significantly more limited in variety. With the ZR, you can choose to record in Red RAW or Nikon RAW or ProRes RAW. You have a lot of options, so many flavors of RAW to choose from. With Sony, on the other hand, you are limited to one RAW codec, which is x-ocn, which may lead you to think that Nikon is offering the superior option with all the choices it gives you. But hold up, because that's actually not true. The issue is that even while you have all of this variety for raw video with Nikon, all of these raw formats have a very minimal level of compression. And compression is really important whenever you're filming in RAW, because if you don't compress raw video, you can have truly massive file sizes. Thankfully, Red, the camera company, were the original pioneers of compressed raw video, and they have fantastic compression levels in their cinema cameras, which can give you very small file sizes that still look fantastic and give you all the control of a raw image. And that's the reason that Red cinema cameras took off and were so popular. But strangely, even though Nikon now owns Red, with all of their compression technology, their engineers decided to not offer any compression options with Red RAW in the camera. Nikon RAW supports a normal compression mode, which drops the file size by about 50%, but people aren't usually buying the ZR for NRAW. They want to film in Red RAW. Plus, it doesn't matter if you choose Red RAW or Nikon RAW or ProRes RAW, the file sizes are truly massive regardless. We are talking literally hundreds of gigabytes for an hour of recording, and memory and storage prices are not getting any cheaper these days. Check this thing out here. So I have in this camera right now a 1 terabyte CF Express Type B card, and we're gonna put that in. And I'm gonna have the camera set to record in 6K at 60 frames per second, which is very high resolution and frame rate. But with that full formatted card, we are only getting exactly 36 minutes of recording time before the memory card is full, before you take up a whole terabyte. That is wild. So that brings us over here to Sony with the FX5, who, like I said, they're only offering one flavor of RAW, x-ocn, but with that format, unlike Nikon, they're offering some truly stellar compression options. And these include the smallest file sizes that Sony has ever offered for RAW recording. Specifically, Sony's OCN C1 and x-ocn C2 compressed RAW formats are so small that you can actually record them to a V60 SD card. You don't even need CF Express, which is extremely impressive. And this camera really makes filming RAW a viable option for many filmmakers, which is fantastic. Side note, by the way, I have a full memory cards cheat sheet that I've put together for the FX5 because it has a lot of video formats and resolutions. And if you want to know whether you can record an SD card or you're going to need a CF Express Type A, I tell you that on this cheat sheet. It's going to tell you exactly what you need to buy. So check that out. It's linked down for free in the video description. Did a lot of research on it. Anyways, if we are putting up the ZR up against the FX5 when it comes to usable raw video, even though you're getting more options with Nikon, you're going to find that Sony is significantly more usable, which puts them ahead. But we aren't done yet, because there's another area of RAW where Sony is significantly ahead of the ZR as well, and that is in the area of the amount of bits that the camera is able to record in RAW. We're not going to get super scientific here, but what you need to know is that the ZR is capable of recording RAW video in 12-bit, which means that it's capable of recording approximately 68 billion colors, which, hey, that's a lot of colors and a big upgrade over the, let's say, 1.07 billion colors, I believe, you can record if you choose to record in 10-bit color. But here's where things get crazy, because Sony with x-ocn isn't 12-bit or 14-bit, it is 16-bit, which you're like, 4 more bits, Matt? Okay, but those 4 extra bits means that the FX5, when recording in RAW, isn't recording even 68 billion colors like the ZR. It is recording over 280 trillion colors. But that said, I don't want to get too in the weeds for RAW video, but Red RAW uses logarithmic RAW while Sony uses linear RAW, which actually makes them pretty close in terms of overall RAW quality. It's just that the Red RAW footage has much less compression, which gives you massive file sizes without better quality. And remember, even with the highest compression C2 format with the FX5, you are still getting this 16-bit color, which is really impressive. And all this together really pushes the FX5 much further ahead of the ZR in the area of RAW video with smaller and more usable file sizes. So check this out. We're going to choose the highest level of compression here, and I'm recording in 5K 16:9 60 frames per second, and I have a 480 gigabyte CF Express Type A card inside this camera. So this card is about half the size of the 1 terabyte card, and actually a little bit smaller in this camera. And how much recording time do we get? Well, 68 minutes of recording time, up from 36 minutes on the ZR that was recording to a 1 terabyte card. So the FX5 can record footage that is 4 times smaller than the ZR with a much smaller file size, thanks to the compression levels of the FX5, which in my opinion make it significantly more usable if you want to record in RAW. Now, related to video quality, we need to take a second to talk about dynamic range as well, because this is unfortunately another area where the ZR struggles. In short, even though this camera is recording in 12-bit RAW, its sensor is still not capable of hitting the same level of dynamic range and recording the same amount of highlight and shadow details as Sony is with the FX5. And so this is something you're definitely going to notice if you are filming a very challenging scene with extremely bright highlights and dark shadows. The FX5 is going to give you more room to bring up those shadows without noise and save the highlights without clipping, which makes the image look more cinematic. Nikon claims, I believe, 15 stops, but it's close to like 11 whenever people measured it. Sony claims 16 stops of dynamic range, and it actually hits 14, which is a significant improvement because dynamic range doubles exponentially. It's only a 3-stop difference between 11 stops on the ZR and 14 stops on the FX5, but that translates to the real-world result of the FX5 capturing 8 times more light information, and it definitely looks better to me than previous Sony cameras. To be clear, I would not consider the dynamic range in the ZR to be bad necessarily, but it's more like average dynamic range, while the FX5 is exceptional. Now, are you ready for Nikon to get a win? Yeah, let's give Nikon a win here. And don't worry, it gets more than 1 bin, by the way. But to start, let's talk about 32-bit float audio recording, which is a feature that has only been added to cameras in the last few years and is incredibly useful, because if you record audio that's too quiet, you can bring up the audio levels without introducing noise and hiss. And if the audio is peaking, you can bring down the audio levels without having them clip, so you can fully recover them and hear everything, which is amazing. Both the Nikon ZR and FX5 support 32-bit float audio recording, which is wonderful, but Sony makes it significantly more complicated, because if you want to record 32-bit float audio, you have to purchase a separate standalone XLR handle that attaches to the hot shoe of the camera, which does give you XLR inputs for channel audio recording and a lot more controls, but like I said, it also costs a lot more money. Nikon, on the other hand, said, hey, see this 3.5 millimeter microphone jack here on the side of the camera? Yeah, just plug any mic into there, any mic at all. That will take 32-bit float audio. No adapter handle required. It is included in the cost of the camera. And this is something that I really wish that Sony had offered with the FX5. And so Nikon wins in the area of 32-bit float audio recording, hands down. Great work, Nikon. This really further cements the ZR as a great budget cinema camera as well. It is just so good for the price. Let's keep the wins coming for Nikon now too, because another area where the ZR wins is in resolution. This camera is capable of recording in 6K, which, keep that in mind whenever we're talking about the recording times earlier, because it was recording in 6K, FX5 was only recording 5K, so Keep that in mind. Should have made that disclaimer earlier. We're making it now, though, so please don't yell at me. What's great is that you get a ton of reframing flexibility with both these cameras, and the Nikon wins, though, because it's 6K versus 5K. Anyways, my point is that you get more flexibility for reframing with the Nikon, so it wins there. But where the FX5 wins, though, over the Nikon is in the area of high frame rate and open gate recording, though, because the FX5 can record in 4K at 120 frames per second with a very small crop, while Nikon has a 1.5 times crop if you want to record at 120 frames per second. And in addition, the FX5 is the first Sony camera that's not a Venice or Burano capable of filming in 3x2 open gates. So if you want to film with anamorphic lenses or just have more room for reframing for vertical videos while filming horizontally, the FX5 wins in open gate recording. Now, as far as low light recording goes, I have to say the ZR holds up pretty darn well with base ISOs at 800 and 6400, which is definitely not bad. But I have to say the FX5 really dominates in low light, just like the FX3 did, because you can go over here and not only do you get ISO 800 and 12,800 like you do on the FX3, the FX5 is the first Sony camera with a triple base ISO of also 4,000. So you get 3 different options, which is really great. I still think you're gonna be very happy with the ZR in low light, but the FX5 is undeniably better in this area. Now, before we talk overheating and ergonomics and I crown a winner, let me tell you about the sponsor of this video, one of my favorite services for wedding filmmakers, CrowdReel. I've talked about CrowdReel a lot and have a deep dive on the service, which I will link to down in the video description. But let me quickly tell you what CrowdReel is and some of the new features that make it even better. CrowdReel is a service you can offer to your couples that lets their wedding guests scan a QR code to upload photos and videos of the event, giving you 200 to 500 extra photos and video clips that you can integrate into the wedding film. If you've ever seen a guest filming something and wish you could have that angle, CrowdReel lets you get it. Even better, CrowdReel recently released an update that gamifies the entire process to encourage the guests to upload. There's a progress bar that all the guests can see that fills up as photos and videos are uploaded, and the photo scavenger hunt feature encourages guests to film important moments like the first dances, cake cutting, grandma and grandpa. There's a leaderboard that fills up and shows who is uploading the most. This is so easy to pitch to your couples as a fun extra part of their wedding day that will result in them receiving a full gallery of photos and videos the day after their wedding. You can make an extra $300 to $500 or more offering this service to your couples, and CrowdReel handles all of the hosting and organization. It's basically passive income. You can check out CrowdReel at the link in the video description, and when you use that link, enter coupon code MATT30 for 30% off your first year of CrowdReel. Let's get back to the comparison. Now, an area where the FX5 does not clearly beat the Nikon actually comes in the area of overheating, which is really interesting because the FX5 has a fan. It's got a big slot on the side. It is built to not overheat, but then you have the Nikon and there is no fan. There's no fan anywhere, and that's okay, because even though it doesn't have a fan, when I tested the Nikon, it lasted for an extremely long time without overheating until the battery died. So it's really, really impressive. And whenever you look at the FX5, on the other hand, it didn't overheat either, but it also had a fan. So I would not really stress about overheating with either of these cameras, which is great. Another area where the Sony doesn't clearly beat Nikon is lenses. Both these companies have very large libraries of glass. And in an interesting wrinkle, Nikon cameras can actually adapt Sony E-mount lenses to Z-mount bodies, making them more versatile. I've used lenses from both these companies, and while I like Sony a bit more, I think they both offer great options for filmmakers. Now, let's talk memory cards. And this is where the ZR really shows itself at its most quirky, let's say. And what I mean by that is that this is such a good camera, but the ergonomics and build of this camera are very confusing because not only is the grip basically non-existent, it is extremely minimal compared to the robust grip of the FX5, which I will say its added thickness actually makes it even easier to hold. I really like how the FX5 feels. Whenever you compare the memory card capabilities of both these cameras now, the FX5, of course, has dual memory card slots, just like the FX3, two CF Express Type A that also double as SD. It's great. They're very easy to access. They offer relay recording where one card fills up, it'll switch to the other one, or simultaneous recording where both the cards can be recorded to at the same time. It works great. It feels very professional. I love the ability to have backups while recording. It's great because if you're filming a wedding, it's a one-take event. You don't want to miss it. You're covered. Well, then you have Nikon with the ZR who said, sure, we're going to give you two memory card slots, but the memory cards are going to be stuffed down here under the battery door. And one of them is going to be CF Express Type B, like you would expect for a cinema camera, but the other is going to be a really strange micro SD card slot, which you can use for, I guess, taking low quality photos, but that's it. This is such a strange setup, and it really makes the ZR a single memory card slot camera. So if you are someone who cares at all about having backups and simultaneous recording, the FX5 makes a lot more sense. But that said, if you're not worried about your memory card corrupting, because there's admittedly a low chance of that happening, then in that case, the ZR still gives you what you need with a single usable card slot, and a weird one that's there maybe for taking photos if you want to put in a micro SD card. Which brings us to the next thing that we need to talk about, because photos is another area where the ZR pulls significantly ahead of the FX5, because the ZR still pretends to be a photo camera, and if you want to take raw photos with it, you can. There's actually a photo switch. Press it, take photos, even though they're heavily marketing it to filmmakers. But with the FX5, on the other hand, it looks like a photo camera still kind of, right? You still got the button, still doing this? No, there is no photo capability at all. The closest you can get is you can record a raw video and then take some stills from that if you want to, which I guess could work, but there's no dedicated photo mode on the FX5. So if you want to take photos, the ZR makes a lot more sense in that use case. Now, back to ZR quirks. Here's another. It does have a HDMI output, which is great. Think people would be very upset if it didn't, but it is only a micro HDMI connection, so you're going to have to use an adapter, and that's kind of a pain. FX5, on the other hand, says, hey, you want ports? Yeah, we'll give you ports. Here is full-size HDMI. You are good to go. Oh, you want an Ethernet port? Here's Ethernet. I guess some people want that. If you're using like a remote camera rig, that's cool. But I can't help but wondering, like, Sony, can you give us like a SDI port or something like that? I wouldn't have been complaining about that. Now, do you want to talk about a tie? Here's an area where both of these cameras tie, and it makes me so happy. And that is that both these cameras have very large screens. Nikon pioneered the large screen with the ZR, and it is truly massive at 4 inches. That's what she said. But seriously, the screen on the ZR is such a dream to use. And once I, as well as other filmmakers, saw it, we began wanting it on every camera. So I was so pleased when Sony copied Nikon and said, hey, we're gonna make the screen larger on the FX5 as well. And while it's not as big as the ZR at only 3.5 inches, it is still quite a jump over their previous cameras. And regardless of which camera you buy, both of them have fantastic screens, which are such a joy to use. It'll make such a difference for you if you are coming from a small camera screen. Once you use either of these cameras, you're not going to want to go back to a small screen. Trust me. Now, I will also add that while the ZR screen is larger, it can only flip out and rotate. It will not do anything else. But the FX5 uses the same screen technology that Sony introduced with the A7R5, where it can not only flip out, but also tilt up and down, which makes it much more versatile than the ZR. I love this screen type, and I'm very glad to see it on the FX5. Like I said, though, I'm still going to call this a tie because both these screens are really, really great. That said, one area where Sony pulls ahead is in the area of electronic viewfinders, because while the ZR does not offer an electronic viewfinder at all, you just get the giant screen, and earlier Sony cameras were really the same way in that aspect. With the FX5, you can purchase an optional and completely detachable EVF that will mount right above the hot shoe of the camera, enable you to have a viewfinder if you want to look through it, which is great. Even better, Sony has partnered with my friends at Condor Blue to create a viewfinder adapter cable, which means you can plug it into this connection port at the top of the FX5 and then mount the EVF to a different part of the cage or shoulder rig that you're using and still be able to use the camera with the EVF. So Sony wins by default in the EVF area because they're the only camera offering an EVF. Default win there. Now, let's give these cameras one more tie while we're at it, and that's in the area of autofocus. Both Nikon and Sony have stellar autofocus, and these cameras both perform very similarly in this regard. If you need good autofocus, I think you're going to be happy with either one. So, which of these cameras should you buy? Which one wins if there could be a winner? Well, here is the last factor, and it's arguably the last one that makes the biggest difference in my opinion. And that is that while we have talked about video recording in RAW, we haven't really talked about non-RAW yet. You know, H.264 and H.265. You don't want to shoot RAW? What? Yes, believe it or not, there's a lot of people that don't want to shoot RAW. So we need to talk about this here for a second, because what I kept coming back to while concerning both these cameras, I have to say, the ZR gives you an absolutely gorgeous RAW image. It looks so good, especially red RAW. The colors, magic, chef's kiss. But I have to say, its non-RAW formats on the other side are where it starts to feel significantly more lackluster than the FX5. Whenever you combine the worse dynamic range of the ZR with less color data from not filming in RAW, in my opinion, it is not as easy to work with H.264 and 265 on this camera, and it doesn't look as good as the non-RAW formats of the FX5. At this point, it feels like Sony has basically perfected their XAVCS-HS, XAVCS-I, and XAVCS formats. They work so well, especially in S-Log 3. It's just a joy to shoot with this camera, regardless of whether you're shooting in RAW or not. With the FX5, I feel very comfortable telling you can film in basically any format and it's going to look good and you're going to get a beautiful image. With the ZR, it feels like Nikon put so much effort into the red RAW codec, and then they also just kind of threw the other non-RAW formats in there and like, here you go, kind of an afterthought, which means that, at least in my opinion, you kind of have to buy a ZR to film in RAW, while the FX5 is more versatile. Throw in the lack of compressed RAW from Nikon, and this is where we need to talk about price, because at the time of recording this video, the ZR costs only $2,200, which is less than half the price of the FX5, which costs $5,000. Not to mention, if you want to enable 32-bit float audio recording, a feature the ZR includes out of the box through the 3.5mm mic jack, you have to spend literally hundreds of dollars more on an XLR handle for the FX5, and so the ZR starts to really feel like a no-brainer, right? The price is what matters the most, and it is significantly cheaper. But I want you to hold on for a second, because I do think there's one wrinkle to this, and that is memory cards and storage. The price for both of these just keeps on climbing, keeps on going up, and as we've already established in this video, if you want to record RAW video, which is arguably the biggest reason you're buying the Nikon ZR, its file sizes in RAW are incredibly large. Remember, we're looking at 36 minutes for 1 terabyte of recording, which is wild. And that means you're gonna have to spend a lot of money on CF Express Type B cards and hard drives to store all of your RAW footage. We're talking easily hundreds, if not thousands of dollars over the years, because you're probably gonna want at least a 0.5 terabyte or 1 terabyte card, and then a lot of hard drives and SSDs to store it all. And that's not cheap right now. With the FX5, on the other hand, you can still use regular SD cards with this camera that you might already own. And the compressed RAW means that you're going to be able to record longer to even smaller memory cards. And don't just consider memory cards, think about hard drives. You can use smaller drives. They're going to take up less storage in the long run. So you may end up spending more money on storage with the ZR than you will with the FX5. Does that mean the FX5 is going to be cheaper in the long run? Not necessarily, but it does mean that the FX5 doesn't really cost double what the ZR does once you factor in the storage costs over the long term. The ZR is still hands down the better deal, and one of the best ways to get into RAW filmmaking with a full frame camera, and I think there are many filmmakers that are extremely happy with it. I know that I love having this camera. It's just a fantastic camera. But at the same time, I personally think that Sony has built a more complete camera package with the FX5, with great ergonomics, versatile codecs that are high quality with compact file sizes, and all the other things that put the FX3 at the top, with IBIS and autofocus and amazing low light. But that said, if you can afford the storage and work through the quirks, there is still a ton of value with the Nikon ZR. It feels to me like the ZR is very much so a 1.0 version of this camera, and I can't help but feel that Nikon could release a ZR Mark II that matches literally all of the capabilities of the FX5, but for a cheaper price. And I'm really hopeful that we see that in a couple years from Nikon. Let's fix the ergonomics a little bit. Let's get rid of the photo switch. People ain't buying this thing for photos. Fix the memory card issue. Fix the micro HDMI. There's just some user things that they could work on, and if they get that fixed, wow, keep a similar price? dominate the FX5. Great work, Nikon. Make it happen, okay? I hope this video helped you out with your purchasing decision. I have a lot of other tutorials for both the ZR and FX5 that you can check out, including a memory card guide that I made for the FX5 that's going to give you a cheat sheet that shows you literally every single memory card that you should buy for the different recording formats, because it gets complicated. So that's going to be really helpful to you. I will link to that down below. And I'll also link to my ZR autofocus guide, because this camera is not set up for good video autofocus out of the box. So that should help you out as well. All of that's linked down in the video description, completely free for you to check out. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.